Okay. It is great to be here. Yeah, looking at a topic that I don't cover in my channel, but it is fascinating. So it's no audio. Oh, okay. Let me see what's happening.
No, no,
Can you hear me?
me. I've got no audio.
Ah, I could. Oh, yeah.
Okay, guys. Okay, now we have audio. Sorry, guys. My bad. My bad. My bad.
Yeah, that's weird because I could hear you from my side. But anyway.
I know.
Hmm,
Now the audio is
yeah.
good. So, my apologies for that, everyone. I will put a timestamp in later. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Michael Glowacki or Michał Glowacki. Dobry wieczór. Dzień dobry. Great to see the notification. I hear you both. Excellent stuff. So welcome everyone. We have RJ, we have Michal or Michael, Just Janice, Dragon, Brother Meathead, very welcome. I replied to you earlier. Thank you for that really interesting story you shared. That was amazing. OT Genesis, Suresh, Dan, Dragon, RJ would see. Yeah, so Rick, Gina, welcome everyone. So Mal, just to update us again, take a few moments, just let us know what you've been up to before we continue.
Wow. It's a bit hard to remember everything. We've been covering an awful lot of late, and we just think. I suppose the main big one of late was I was covering a paper by AJ Juice, and I had a little bit of input into it in the sense that I was throwing a few ideas his way. He was able to follow a Qibla that pointed to a mosque in Baghdad, which was able to identify the original round city of Baghdad that has been hidden for the last 1,000 years in clear sight. And the interesting thing is, it turns out that this was the Pompadita Academy. So it
Right.
was a Jewish academy, then it was converted into a mosque, and the implications of this are pretty massive. And that's pretty much. I've been working a lot with AJ Juice, kind of on and off over the last few weeks. So kind of just delving into new ideas. I
Right.
think the big one, I suppose, over the past month has been looking at the Jewish link with the origins of Islam, which has been a real eye opener. And one of the big ones was the fact that the Quran seems to be using the word jinn as a coded term for the Jewish academy leaders. And they had a word actually which is spelled Dyin, so it's just a very playful um, alteration of the name.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense because when you see references to the jinn in the Quran, it's pretty obvious this talking about human beings and not some demons because of, talking about the jinn listening to the Quran and stuff like that, which makes no sense. But there's a lot more as well.
All
There's
right.
the concept of the the dispute over the Babylonian Talmud versus the Jerusalem Talmud seems to be cropping up in the Quran as well. So it seems to suggest that there's Jewish sects that are arguing about key
Yeah.
directions where Judaism is going. That's really what I've been focused on. It's been
That
really exciting.
makes good sense to me as well. Yeah. So I'm going to switch over
Yeah,
to the other side, to the other camera. And
yeah.
yeah, so guys, you don't get to see Mel with his new and improved look, but but yeah, yeah. On my side, as you guys know, I have been on my coffee page. I have been publishing posts. I think this week I've published something like 30 different posts. Like someone asked me today about paganism, and you'd be surprised how much writing I've actually done in the last while, but narration is a pain in the bum. So I just decided to hand it off to an AI, and it just makes my life easy. I can just get this material out the door, then try to read and edit and make mistakes. So this one was Sol Invictus. I just did this as a request from someone, and and this the cult of Sol Invictus dates to 274 A.D., which is nearly 300 years after the birth of Christ. So it couldn't come before Christianity. I don't see how Christianity was based on that now.
No, unless you got a time machine. So yeah,
Yeah, well,
but
and then
it's
of
amazing how
course,
many times that is used. There's an awful lot of people who think they know more than the rest of us, and they keep regurgitating that same lie.
Yeah.
So it's good that it's been put to bed, that one.
Yeah. And then, of course, I've been annoying apparently some Calvinists because Calvin's own writings, I did an analysis of that. His own writings, they show clearly double predestination and a lack of free will. And then, of course, here's just something before we get into the main topic. How do you realize that the Catholic canon was only established firmly in 1546, or between 1545 and 1565? So this was at the Council of Trent, which was 3 councils which happened over about a 20-year span. Prior to that, there was no fixed canon. Now there was a known selection of books, but the canon had not been finally and formally recognized. The Protestant canon was only recognized after 1600. Okay, after 1600, in the 17th century. So Mal, simple question. How can you have sola scriptura from the 1st century if the Protestant canon was only confirmed in the 17th century?
Yeah, it doesn't kind of make sense to me. You first of all need to establish what the scriptures are before you can say this is their guiding light, So, yeah.
Correct.
Not very logical.
And the Protestant canon was taken directly from the Catholic canon. And of course, now, of course, as you know, everyone knows Catholics are evil Satanists because they have 73 books in their canon. Correct, Mal?
Yep, that's it.
Well, Martin Luther's Bible has 75 books in it, Mal. What does that make him? Double extra Satanist?
75?
75, Mal.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Did they forget to tell you that in Martin Luther class at school, Mal?
No. Are these extra 2 scriptures that are recognized by the Ethiopians or something? Or
something like that. Yeah, I think the EO recognizes them, but yeah, he's got 75 books in his Bible.
Wow, that's a new one for me, yeah.
So yeah, he's the neighbor of the beast. Yeah, true.
We were talking before the live stream about the idea that the Protestants followed the Hebrew canon, or the Jewish canon from the 1st century, but there was a problem with that, you were saying.
Yeah, so the Hebrew canon, what is that called? That is called it's got a name. Okay, so Martin Luther, one of the arguments that he made was that he rejected the Catholic canon because the books that the Catholics included were not included in the original Hebrew canon, or what they call the Palestinian canon. Yeah. So now, because he said the Jews did not have that canon, right? However, because also now these books were rejected because they were not in Hebrew. So the Jews had rejected them because these books were not in Hebrew, and therefore the Protestants rejected them because they're not in Hebrew. However, in 1947, they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they discovered Hebrew versions of all of these books. The Masoretic.
That was inconvenient. That was very inconvenient, wasn't it?
So they discovered that all of these books had been originally in Hebrew. However, these original versions had been lost. They discovered them at the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Jews were wrong. The Protestants were wrong. I will accept a written apology anytime, guys. A written apology at any moment. Drop it in there. But of course, yes, Michal, thank you again for the Masoretic, and it's Głowacki, if I recall. So how could we be any more sarcastic? I will try. I will do my best, but I might bring some irony as well. You never know. However, Martin Luther and his friends had to get rid of those books in the Deuterocanon because he renamed them to Apocrypha. So they actually changed the definition. So the Protestants were very careful to change various definitions. But those books had to go because those books contradicted Protestant doctrine now.
Yeah, if you have scriptures that are basically or can be used for the belief in the afterlife, in particular, the resurrection and so forth.
Pray to saints, that kind of thing, yeah.
Well, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Purgatory and things like that.
Yes.
Obviously, you don't want those in your scriptures. You have to chuck them out if you want to keep it nice and simple.
So they had to go. So look, sola scriptura, guys. The Bible alone, except crap, these 7 books got to go, because the Bible alone, the Bible is holy. Don't touch. Get rid of these books. Get rid of these books. Get rid of these. It makes perfect sense, right? Nothing contradictory or hypocritical about that at all. Correct, Mal?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, the parallel kind of irony is the fact that the Protestants threw out, goodness knows, 15 centuries of tradition, but then planted their own tradition in place of it. So they're there's a bit of hypocrisy there.
Yep.
We're not for tradition. We're sola scriptura, but accept our tradition that we're creating.
Yeah, I will be
You know.
covering all of this. So I will be doing a discussion on the Protestant canon. So I'm busy working on this right now. Do you know the word canon? So while I'm actually, you know what? Let me just show you guys something I'm busy working on right now. This is going to be ready probably in a week or so, week or two. But
Mhm.
the word canon, right, typically refers to, everyone says it's the list of books in the Bible, right? But of course, the Bible doesn't say which books belong in it. But did you know that the word canon, the original usage of the word canon, is from ecclesiastical use, and it means pertaining to the rules or institutes of the church, rule, law, or decree of the church. So the canon is the decree of the church. The list of books in the Bible, according to the word canon, is what the church decides is the canon. It's actually in the definition of the word. So that's like a
Wow.
little bit of a oopsie.
Yeah.
Am I reading that correct, Mel?
Yeah. You need the church in order to have a canon. Yeah.
So the word canon actually means that the church decides the biblical canon. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And then the definition was changed in the 1580s by the good old,
Yeah.
well, we know who.
Well,
So
do you know
yeah.
what's also
Yeah.
rather interesting, and which kind of begs the question of origins of the idea of sola scriptura? But the Sadducees were the original sola scripturas. You know, they threw out the idea of oral tradition, and it's just interesting in the 16th century, around the time where we sort of suspect that Islam was having an influence into Europe through the Ottomans. And, we currently believe that Islam has had some basis in Judaism, and the ideas transmit down through
The Sharia
centuries.
clearly is derived, or the structure of the Sharia, not the laws themselves, but the structure is most certainly derived and stolen vocabulary from the Jewish
Yeah,
Talmudic law, yeah?
yeah. Well, it's kind of like energy cannot be created or destroyed. Well, ideas can't, maybe likewise, can't be destroyed too easily. They tend to just transmit and re-emerge under different guises. And I think sola scriptura is really a Sadducee idea that has come down the line.
Yeah, no, I think that makes good sense. So guys, I've published something like 25 or 30 videos. I still have more that are ready, and there are some that are still due to drop over the next 2 weeks. So I've got about 30, maybe 40 videos that will drop this month that I've been working on, and short 3 to 5 minute videos, and they are coupled. So there's an article that is coupled with the video, so you have a video and an article if you want to read it and copy paste. Please use these, drop these in, make memes of them, quote them, whatever you need to do, but please use them. Okay, so let's get back onto the main act. We've been running for a little while. Dr. Gemmel, welcome from New Zealand. And Tom Yokai, Rick, and Ben Yosef. Hey, welcome. Good to see everyone. By the way, tomorrow for the members, I've set for 4 p.m. my time, which is, I believe, 11 a.m. EST and 3 p.m. London time, a call for the members. If you're a member on Coffee, because I need to set that up and finalize that, but you're also welcome to dial in, but please contact me. Yeah, so that'll be for members tomorrow, AMA tomorrow. Okay, guys, so we're here today to discuss, this was a genuine question that was raised at the time. Gil von Sempringham, welcome. This was a question raised at the time of the Reformation. Where was your church before Luther? Right? This was a genuine historical question. And
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of research work, so I just want to introduce you to this. This is not my final examination of this, but I have looked in depth at the Protestant claims of historical succession, and to be blunt, and you know I typically am, it's a complete joke. It's a historical joke. So, yeah, let's get into this one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is from a paper, okay? Christian History, Studies in Christianity and Culture from Cambridge. Cambridge is a famous, it's either a deli in Liverpool, or it's a famous university in Cambridge. Which one am I looking at, Mel?
Yeah, I would kind of think they do a good kebab there. I think.
Okay,
could
so
be
it's
wrong.
either a kebab shop or it's a famous university. This is the third oldest university in the world. Something like
Yeah,
that.
something on
like
those lines. Yeah, yeah.
Something like that. So it looks like it might have credentials. This is S.J.
Yeah.
Barnett. I believe there's a link in the description, so please download it or just look it up, okay? And yeah, so it's in the Church History, Studies in Christianity and Culture. This is from 1999. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, after the Reformation, one of the most pressing issues for Protestants was to locate an appropriate answer to a disarmingly simple Catholic question. This guy's a Protestant, okay? So I am utilizing a
Right.
Protestant
Wow.
source here.
Yeah.
So the guy's very honest, which previously I also used the Protestant paper, which obviously exposed the Protestant position as being very weak when I discussed Irenaeus and the Gnostics. However, he does tread lightly on some issues. You can see it in the language, but for the most part, this raises some serious questions.
Yeah.
And he says, where was your church before Luther? And the Reformed religion was considered to be an invention, okay, of iniquitous religious charlatans who, in league with monarchs and aristocrats, were exploiting religious credulity for material and sexual ends. Now, I can confirm once you start looking at Luther and Calvin, they were in league with government, let's say the government, right? Let's just use that overarching term, if not entirely accurate. But they were in league with the political elite. That certainly was true. So, Catholic apologists usually designated Luther and Calvin as Manichaean heretics, and I, honestly, from what I've read, I would agree. From the 3rd century dualist heresy of Manes, Mani. So this article discusses the Protestant reply to such claims, right? Focusing mainly on English and Huguenot thought, that's French. And the first is to illustrate the lengths to which some polemicists used history selectively or rewrote the history of some medieval sects in order to provide historical legitimacy for Protestantism. The second aim is to reveal how such claims remained important in English Protestant thought into the 18th century. So we will look from the 16th to the 18th century, and he's already telling us these guys were faking history, and literally the Protestants were relying on heretics to prove apostolic lineage. Your thoughts, Mel?
Yeah, this is no surprise to me. I've often thought that there's a very strong ahistorical bent in Protestantism. I could never quite understand why most Protestants aren't asking these sort of questions. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what you've found here.
All right. Now, you'll notice that the opening slide I had for, at least the thumbnail I had for the YouTube video was, Mel, is it Jesus and the 12 Calvinists? Or is it Jesus and the 12 Lutherans? Or is it Jesus and the 12 Baptists?
I'm going to go for 12 apostles.
12 apostles. Now, you see, that is evidence of the Catholic Church going back and changing history to not admit that Jesus was a Calvinist. And Jesus says, I want to make you Calvinists.
Yeah. But essentially, that is what is being argued, isn't it? That
pretty much. When you phrase it the way I just did, I think it sounds pretty stupid. So, now, most Protestants, now this historian does state that typically historians would refer to the big names, right? They typically refer to the big names, the guys who are very famous, but he says, hold on, plenty of history was written, big name historians, but plenty of history was written that's been ignored because they're from less known historians. And his focus here is on very, very well-known, very influential, very detailed, good scholarly work by people that have been overlooked. Most Protestants naturally regarded the tenets of Jesus Christ related in the New Testament as indisputable proof of the historical legitimacy of Protestantism, although the divided nature of English Protestantism meant such generalizations were of very limited value. Now, he's saying here that English Protestants were divided. Now, the typical term that Protestants use is these are branches. The correct term is these are schisms. These are schisms within Protestantism. These are not branches. I will do a very detailed analysis of that. I have something already in the works, and you're going to see just how many branches there are, right? Going back to the 1st century, let's just say. And now, here's the thing. Which one of these branches or schisms is the correct one if they have literally contradictory doctrine? And if, right? Your thoughts, Mel, on what we're seeing here?
Well, just in response to that last point, there is nothing within their own belief system that can prove that their position is correct over all the others. They're in exactly the same boat, I would have thought. It's a very subjective position, you know. All they can say is we're right and everyone else is wrong, essentially, you know.
Correct.
But, yeah.
I mean, on what authorities? The question is, on what authority are they stating that they have legitimate standing, and they don't,
Mm.
because they're relying on Scripture alone. Now, again, I said Scripture alone. That only goes back to the 1600s for Protestants. So who was in authority prior to the canon being founded, right? And all of these heresies. I mean, do you remember where the heretics were writing, "Oh, these gosh darn Calvinists, they're really getting under our feet. You know, we're trying to establish our Gnostic heresy, and these Calvinists are really just running all over us." Do you remember anything like that in Irenaeus' writings?
I don't know. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing. There's nothing remotely like Calvinism in the early days that I can see, anyway.
So he says here that what happens is the Protestants were searching for forebears or ancestors in the primitive and medieval church. Now, English claims to Protestant antiquity. There's the Acts and Monuments, the first Latin edition in 1554, and the first English edition in 1563, okay, by John Fox. This guy was very influential. One of the first English attempts to provide a reply to the charge of Protestant novelty or innovation, bidda, and religious charlatanry. He sought to establish the continuity of a proto-Protestant piety from apostolic times to the Reformation. His message was clear. There had been a de facto succession of true proto-Protestant piety from the apostles to the 16th century Protestants. This claim has been made over and over. Thousands had suffered blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, Laird Oakey, a well-known historian, okay, the result of effectively ignoring minor English historians in the 18th century is a general one and not restricted to the church. Laird Oakey has noted the tendency of scholars to focus on a few big names has produced an incomplete and somewhat distorted picture of 18th century history. However, so we're seeing now a more complete picture. Let's just continue and see what we get told. Fox's account featured Rome, especially medieval Rome, as the instigator of religious corruption and oppression. Fox, although he himself became a staunch Calvinist, was typical of many Anglican thinkers. He wanted to rescue something from the wreckage of the medieval church upon which to ground the historical legitimacy of Anglicanism. For some thinkers, the papacy had not become fully anti-Christian until the 11th century under Pope Gregory VII. So, at first, Anglicans denied that historical proof for the legitimacy of their church was necessary because conformity with Scripture was the only test of a church's legitimacy. Your thoughts on that, and how do they say, well, we conform with Scripture? Even the Gnostics made the exact same claim to Irenaeus.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, they weren't satisfied by merely proving their case on Scripture, but they wanted to actually say, on top of that, the papacy is anti-Christian. So historically, the church has lost its way through the papacy. Is that
correct?
Is that correct? Yeah. Right. Yeah.
They made the claim that the church was anti-Christian under the 11th. Yeah. In the 11th century, the church had become anti-Christian under Pope Gregory VII.
Like I would say that probably there is plenty of sinfulness right through the whole history of the church. You could literally pick any period of church history, even going all the way back to Judas, if you wanted to make that kind of argument. But then that's a kind of a skewed argument, because essentially you also have to look at the fact that there were saints, there were people who were Orthodox all the way through. So I think it suggests a kind of a cherry picking, looking at the darker periods of church history.
I will suggest a distinction, because the Pope is like the manager of a company. He's like the chairman, right? You have rules of the board. You have policies in the company. Yeah. If the chairman breaks those rules, he's not following the rules. He's breaking them. But also, the chairman didn't found the company. He's not the founder of the company. He's just running it. He gets replaced. You get a new one, and maybe the next guy does a great job. Yeah. However, Martin Luther started a new religion. He's the founder of the religion. Yeah. And don't forget, Martin Luther, as we discussed previously, Martin Luther claimed to be a prophet. Martin Luther was hailed as a prophet. This placed him above the level of a mere pope. Yeah. Martin Luther claimed to speak for Jesus directly. Your thought, Mel, before I go on?
Yeah, it's kind of, it smacks of a messianic movement, that it's not good enough to have a vicar of Christ, someone who's representing Christ but isn't creating their own religion. The messianic sort of line is basically saying, we can create our own religion how we like it. We are the Messiah, or I am the Messiah. That seems to be the way that they've gone. And this is something that has occurred again and again down through the centuries. There's always been some group that have tried to form their own messiahship. And we see that a lot in the 7th century as well. Yeah, it's a recurring problem.
So notice many writers here did not ignore the polemical value of establishing an origin for English Christianity and by obvious implication the lineage of Anglicanism. Now, they needed to establish a lineage, that they had a line in history back to the apostles with apostolic succession. Now, isn't that interesting that they would need to establish this to give themselves legitimacy? I thought they were legitimate. I thought it's Bible alone. But notice that they don't have any way to trace a lineage back and says, hold on, our teachings go back to this guy, to this guy, to this guy, to this guy, back to the apostles. They don't have that. So Fox attributed the conversion of the English to the supposed 1st century visit of St. Joseph of Arimathea to England. And the earliest claim for Joseph of Arimathea's visit to England is found in William of Malmesbury's De Antiquitate Glastoniensis Ecclesiae in 1130.
Yeah, that to me strikes of legend, to put it mildly.
That does strike me as rather questionable. So that strikes me as very, very questionable, because when I looked at it, the earliest references go back to like the 5th century, not before that. And those were definitely Catholics. So not Anglicans. So they mentioned here, from the school of Christ himself have we received the documents of our faith. Right, so that's an interesting claim. From Jerusalem, and not from Rome, whom both Peter and also Christ hath called Babylon, for that she so aptly thereunto agreeth in ministering confusion to the world.
Yeah. Like, it's my understanding that it was, I don't remember the name of the Pope, but a Pope sent Augustine to Canterbury, and that was the official establishment of the church in England. I'm not sure what century that was. I think
only in the 6th century.
6th century, yeah.
I did a talk on that on Cadman's hymn when I did a story on Cadman's hymn.
Yeah, it seems like they're creating a mythology to try and split things so that they can get behind the connection with Rome and try and put something before that. But it seems like they're really kind of clutching at straws with this one.
But notice here there's definitely a polemic against Rome here, and they're trying to establish that the church is from Jerusalem. They're trying to deny. So this idea goes back to the 11th century, and I'm sure we're going to find, if we start looking, we're going to start finding, what's his name, Joachim of Fiore, somewhere behind that. So during the 17th century, some English attempts to trace a general Protestant pedigree became more specific arguments. So notice these arguments only started in the 16th century. These are fairly new historically, right? Yeah. And the choice and or depiction of Protestant forebears was usually affected by the ecclesiological stance of the writer. So what you'll find is, with Protestant claims to apostolic succession, there are hundreds of them. There's no one clear story. And for instance, someone might make a claim and say, we go through these groups, and then it turns out later that, oh my golly, we traced our way through flaming heretics, obvious heretics that no one would believe. And the next week they change their story. Or a few months later, another theologian in the same church comes up with a completely different narration as to how it is. And there were just hundreds of these stories over the next 200 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, okay, so hold on. So let me see. So the Puritans considered their Presbyterianism outlook the same as that of the church polity practiced by the apostles. Most Puritans felt relatively free to denounce much or most of the medieval church as anti-Christian popery, right, without fear of undue damage to their theological conceptions. So the Puritans, who I discussed previously, and they are very much Gnostic in their outlook, right? Yeah. So there was this. So they had to denounce the authority of the church. They had to declare sola scriptura, but understand they didn't have sola scriptura until about 3 weeks before they were made up as a church. So there's a couple of issues there. Any thoughts before I go on?
No, it's good stuff. Yeah, it's it's surprising that they managed to pull this story off, considering that they had a conclusion and then they had to go searching for the evidence for their conclusion, which is not the normal way going about things.
Yep.
You know?
They identified what they considered to be elements of apostolic purity and polity in the primitive and medieval church. Polity would be the church governance structure. They claimed that some of those elements survived papal persecution and finally triumphed in the Reformation. For such thinkers, a self-evident historically identifiable link between Protestantism and the New Testament was forged. So in other words, it's a recent story going back about 500 years. And then of course you go to the next group and they have a completely different story. So then you've got the core of the Protestant claim to antiquity, often centered on the 12th century movement of the poor men of Lyon. What the heck just happened? Of the poor men of Lyon, also known as the Waldenses, from the name of their founder, Waldes. Now, of course, this name has come up often. There was the stream that Thaddeus did with this David Suarez guy, and everyone was saying, well, Martin Luther really didn't have much to do with the Reformation. Actually, it was the Waldenses, Peter Waldes. Actually, he's the guy. It's like, that's why in 1517 there was like the Reformation. And then, of course, in 2017, we had the celebration of Peter Walden, but Luther just was, Luther just accepted the trophy on his behalf. That's why it was the 500th centenary of nonsense.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, other forebears cited usually included the 12th and 13th century Albigenses, a branch of the Cathari of southern France. Now, the Albigensians were heretics. Outright anti-Christian, completely, unambiguously, utter heretics. Plenty of Calvinists, Protestants, Baptists, you name it, said, well, our church traces its way through, you may as well say that we came through Satanists, okay, quite blunt.
Yeah.
Every single Protestant group traces their way through heresy somewhere. They have, and they all fizzle out in about the 11th century. Jan Hus.
And notice there.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just notice there with John Hus. He's obviously living in, Bohemia would be Hungary, right?
Yes.
Which is Ottoman controlled, so highly under the influence of Islam, and under the ideas and theology of Islam. So that,
were they taking a little bit of money from them? Were they getting a little bit of military aid? Were they being nicey? Were they, maybe, who knows?
Absolutely. Well, I would say absolutely, because the Ottomans want to create a divide in the Christian camp. So it served their interest to have Christians divided between each other.
Heretics, Bohemia is Czechia, but look, that area, Hungary, certainly had lots of heresy going on. In like the whole area was occupied by, or influenced financially or otherwise, by the Ottomans. And Jan Hus, especially in English thought, and John Wycliffe and his followers, the Lollards. So, in other words, all of these thoughts traced through who were known heretics at the time.
Yeah.
Despite some dissatisfaction with certain facets of these sects, although Puritans often avoided highlighting such tricky historical matters, don't worry, I am going to be making sure in the future I will highlight these tricky historical matters and say that the Puritans literally state that they effectively are descended from Satanists. For all intents and purposes, these Albigensians are Satanists, right? For our purposes now. They are outright heretics, but okay, you guys are Puritans, definitely Christian, sure. Okay? And they represented sturdy proto-Protestant hostility to Rome and its perceived unchristian episcopal hierarchy. So, then there was the need to defend the historical legitimacy of the Anglican episcopate. Anglicans were wary of defending those medieval opponents of Rome who had been overtly anti-episcopal. In other words, they didn't have an authority structure in the church. So now you had one group going, hey, we don't like authority, we want to have a flat management structure. The other group's like, hey, we like having a bishop on top, and then the whole structure. And so, we're going to go the other way. So, because as you know, there was each one of these groups, every single one of these Protestant groups founded the one true Christian church. Every single one of them. But the church was like this, the church was like that, the church was like this, the church was like that. So, I don't know, which one of them was the correct one? Because they could not agree, but they all were the one true church. Your thoughts, Mike?
I think my impression is that you can trace the hierarchy right back to the beginnings of the church, the first century. So essentially, they're overruling Jesus in terms of their ideas. They're basically saying, "Oh, Jesus had these ideas, but we're going to do it a different way to, what was received." That's my impression of it, at least.
Okay, so what you've got is Deus Imperatus says Hebrew canon, the Masoretic text, was established in 870 and was a fourth generation text, so that's quite late.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mm.
Okay, so now Richard Field, who was involved here with Queen Elizabeth and King James I, had some interest in claiming that only a faction of the medieval church had made a mistake. He denied that Luther and the others had advanced the idea of the invisible church, the enduring existence of true Christians, or proto-Protestants, guided by providence, yet often invisible amid the deep anti-Christian corruption of the church. That, of course, is an Islamic story which traces its way back to the 8th century, which says that Christ had established Islam, and of course that they were suppressed, but a small group of them had remained loyal, waiting for Muhammad to appear, and they recognized Muhammad, and then Islam came back out. So this is really just a repeat of a Mohammedan story.
And the hidden imam,
Correct.
Same idea.
Correct. Field restricted the number of heretical movements he acknowledged as legitimate forebears. So notice here, there was acknowledgement of the fact that even like the Puritans and others were tracing their lineage directly through heresy. So now he's saying, hold on, we can't do that. This is going to look bad for us.
Yeah.
So, and he avoided the mention of separatist movements such as the Albigenses and Waldenses because they were known to be heretics. He represented the Reformation as a struggle for the national self-determination of churches rather than a generalized secession from a church irremediably contaminated by the beast. In the book of Revelation, idolatrous worship was given to the beast, meaning Rome, a term much favored by Puritans in anti-papal and sometimes anti-Anglican polemic. How can these Puritans be slandering the one true Anglican church, which goes back to the beginning? That's shocking to me. Any thoughts, Mel, before I go on?
Yeah, I think the idea of an invisible church is kind of too convenient, because you can create a mythology where you say, well, there's an absence of evidence because it's invisible. That's kind of like, come on. There has to be something visible if you're going to make
Gnostic,
a case for,
Mel, because it's a feeling. I can feel this invisible. Oh, you can't see it. It's in my head. It's in.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got secret voices. I got the secret voice. Understand? It's not physical. Now you're starting to, what's the word? You're starting to go from the material into the purely spiritual realm. Faith alone, right? Gnostic.
Yeah.
Spirit alone. So that takes you. That's moving in that direction. So Field presented Wycliffe and indeed Huss and Jerome of Prague as champions of independent national churches. So what if these churches go off the rails? Who is going to oversee those churches and control them? What authority is going to say, okay, you guys are currently just... Remember, in the New Testament, you see Paul has to go to various churches. He writes letters. We still have them in the Bible today, and saying, you guys have gone south. You guys have gone off the rails. You've gone stage left, whatever you've done, but you need to come back to the faith. So, because churches that were left alone to their own devices often made up their own nonsense. So who is going to oversee these churches on what authority? Mel?
Yeah. Just in the first century, the church had heresies that it was confronting. And at that time, they coined the word Catholic to indicate a universal church that is the same once and for all, in order to counteract that idea of a local church where you do it separately and differently in your church as opposed to another church. So they're basically the Catholic concept was really to say, this is Christ's church. It's not, truth can't be changed. It's one and for all time.
Yep.
As opposed to heresy is where you can pick and choose what you like and drop what you don't like. It's basically one or the other.
Yeah.
That's how they viewed it in the first century, at least,
Yeah. And this agent here of the Queen, of course, he says he presented Wycliffe and Huss as champions of independent churches. However, for some high church writers, even Wycliffe was regarded as a dangerous anti-Episcopalian heretic. So it looks like they couldn't even agree amongst themselves. And now, notice here, they mention a book here called Reformation of the Heretics. And he's medieval heretics as Protestant martyrs, because it's well acknowledged that Protestants were referring to actual, not just heresies, but actual, we're talking just Gnostics and people who were clearly unchristian as actual Christians. That nobody in their right mind would agree is Christian.
Yeah.
So, Deus Imperator, well, look, the Anglican Church has been all over the map. They've been basically everything from proto-Catholic to Puritans to whatever, and everything in between. They're like a drunk driver swerving all over the road from the far left lane to the far right lane, and yeah, that's been the Anglican Church. Okay, so as Milton, it was on. Okay, so the Church of England had to preserve episcopal succession, the bishops, because they were under a queen and they needed that authority. Because the queen was the head of the church, she had to have authority. She couldn't have a bunch of guys going around. I'm Brother Bob, and I'm Brother Steve, and I'm Brother Lloyd, and I'm Brother Mike, and we're all in charge here, and we're communists, right? So, in his Acts and Monuments, both the Albigensian and especially the Waldensian movement formed a de facto part of the medieval succession of true Christian piety. Now, understand here, the Protestants are now claiming that the Albigensians, you don't understand, it's like saying that Satan himself was the founder of my branch of the Protestant church. It's as egregious as that, but this is what they were doing.
Wow. That's remarkable that they had the goal to say that.
Yeah, I mean, the Albigensians are obviously flaming heretics. So Fox defended them both as part of the medieval progress of the Reformed religion and stated that the Waldensian articles were the same as those received in the Reformed churches. You should check that one day. In 1655, the Anglican historian Thomas Fuller abandoned the Foxian perspective and concluded that the story of the visit of Joseph of Arimathea to England was true, but he did not defend the Waldenses or other sects as Protestant forebears. You know, here's a weird thing. If they all have the one truth, right? If the Holy Spirit's guiding them into truth, how come they're all over the frickin' place and don't connect on the one truth? How come they're all over the place, can't agree, and they're contradicting each other? Mel?
Yeah, it's typical fragmentation. Once it's like what I said a few minutes ago about once you abandon the concept of one church that's universal, that doesn't change, then it's whatever you fancy, happens, and things fragment. Yeah. Yep.
So understand, historically speaking, this guy is writing very mildly, but what he's saying here, this is earth-shaking for me, because he's a Protestant and he's tiptoeing around these facts, but really this is a mess. This is early. Yeah. This is 1655. This is pretty close to the Reformation. Yeah. This is an absolute historical mess these guys have got themselves in, and this is just in England. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
The Foxian tradition continues.
So he's recognizing there is a problem. There's that, they can't really sustain the story that they're trying to push in terms of the origins.
And you'll see the story change over and over. So the Foxian tradition continued unscathed in much of the historical thought of Presbyterian-minded Protestants. However, Fox had not attempted to backdate the origin of the 12th century Waldenses in order to provide Protestantism with an even more antique lineage, which implies that others had tried to backdate the Waldenses. I think they try to push them back into the 7th or 6th century or 5th century. So they try to claim that this 12th century group actually was 500 years older, to try and make them, well, you see, that's early church stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's called lying, and I don't think that's a Christian practice myself, but I could be wrong. Mel, what do you think?
I think you're spot on there. Yeah. It's very suspect when facts have to be tweaked in order to build your case. Yeah.
Propaganda?
Not good.
Deus Imperita is putting some very interesting history in the comments. So guys, just check the comments made by Deus Imperita. Some very interesting historical information there that's actually interesting to me. I didn't know some of this stuff at all. So very, very interesting about the limitations in the English language. Theodore Beza, 1519 to 1605, was the successor to Calvin at Geneva, and he was not satisfied with the doctrine of the Waldenses. Hold on, everyone was happy with the Waldenses. Now you're saying there's disagreement? Oh my, Protestant disagreement now? I'm shocked. And Beza had told his audience they had never adhered to papal superstition. Okay, great. And had opposed Roman corruption since time immemorial. So these guys had been around since forever. Okay, fine. Then the 7th religious war in France between the Huguenots and the Catholics. The 6th had taken place only 3 years before. And Calvinist apologists wanted to bolster Protestant historical legitimacy against detractors. According to the Waldensians themselves, noted Beza in his concluding remark on the Waldenses, their doctrine went as far back as the year 120, although he did not cite any reasons for giving that particular date. Beza gave the opinion that the Waldenses were the survivors of the pure primitive Christian church. Did you know that, Mel?
No, this is pure and utter mythology here that's we're being presented with. Wow, I'm amazed.
So let me see, let's continue. So Beza, as many others were to do, argued that the 12th century Waldenses were not the original Waldenses. You see, these are, oh my gosh, these are the fake Waldenses. Rather than original Waldenses were understood by such thinkers to have been the ancient inhabitants of the French Piedmont valleys, a people existing as far back as the time of the Apostles. Did you know that there was a Christian settlement at the time of the Apostles in France, in the Piedmonts, in the valleys of France, Mel?
All new to me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe we should look up where is the Piedmonts
no one
in France.
this.
Hang on, I'm going to find this now. Now I'm curious. Piedmont. Hold on, is that in France? Piedmont's in Italy. Okay. Okay, let's go have a look here. So this is Piedmont right here, right over there, just next to the French Alps, just on the right hand side, right over there. So guys, Christianity was settled here in the 1st century, just so you know. Back to the time of the Apostles, there was a Christian settlement right here. Fantastic. You learn something new every day, Mel, don't you just?
Absolutely.
For Beza, the ancient Vaudois, or the Waldenses, were the origins of the poor men of Lyon, the Albigenses. Guys, again, the Albigenses, look, I'm not saying they were Satanists, but they were definitely anti-Christian, therefore they were by definition satanic. But understand, it's like, now he's saying that, hold on, these Waldenses are the origins of the Albigenses. The Albigenses, it's like saying that my church is founded upon the church of Satan. Okay? Mm-hmm. Therefore, I'm a great Christian. I am the original Christian. Honestly, if you want to appeal to the Albigenses, you have your head stuck up so far up your ass that you are busy licking your tonsils while you're talking. Honestly, yeah. It's just so bad.
I'm just reading here about the Albigensian belief. Yeah. It's essentially Manichaean by the looks of it. It's dualistic.
Yeah, it's Gnostic. It's very Manichaean. Definitely, it's influenced by Manichaeanism. Yeah, it's most definitely influenced by Manichaeism and Gnostics. Yeah,
seen as a struggle between good and evil, the physical world was considered inherently corrupt, evil, and the creation of Satan. So this is like so fundamental. Like Christianity teaches that God creates the universe and says it is good. You know, that's what we have in Genesis, but this is completely contradictory to
correct. It. Therefore, technically it is satanic, and these are Gnostics. Yeah. Correct. These are Gnostics. These are Manichaean Gnostics, and they are claiming that these 1st century Christians, these Gnostics, are the founders of Protestantism. Yeah. I'm saying they're correct. Yes, I'd say 100% correct.
Yeah. Human beings were believed to be spirits trapped in physical bodies. So you can see the body is viewed as bad. This is very similar to Islam as well, in the sense of, you know, the section about the crucifixion of Jesus, the idea that Jesus couldn't be, I'll try to remember it correctly, but this problem with the idea of Jesus being crucified and the problems with it is I think is kind of connected to that. I don't know if you see where I'm going with that.
Not sure. Hold on. I just saw this this was an interesting comment by Deus Imperator. Waldensians went through about 3 revolutions in their belief systems. They finally aligned with the Reformed doctrine. So in other words, they had the fixed truth. They had the one true faith nailed down from the start, except they had to fix it a few times. Yeah. And then also another point he makes here, and this is something that I need to get to, but I have mentioned this. I've mentioned this source to you guys before on the channel. Hold on. Let me just do this. I have mentioned this before, but Deus Imperator has just brought this up again. And it's worth noting, the Baptist book, The Trail of Blood, traces themselves through a whole bunch of Gnostic groups, and this I've mentioned before. The Baptists are the most egregious, probably, of these groups, and they trace their history and their lineage through a whole bunch of heresies and Gnostic groups that are known to be anti-Christian Gnostics. So yes, and this is very common, this is not unusual. All of Protestantism traces its way through Gnosticism at some point. This is not an accident. This is all of them. In 1587, the Dominican turned Protestant. Yeah, sorry.
I'm just looking into the Waldensinians. Sorry, I'm not pronouncing it
Waldensians,
correctly, but Waldensians. Biblical literalism. They emphasized the direct study of the Bible and believed in the necessity of reading and interpreting Scripture firsthand. But the literalism bit has caused huge problems in terms of creationism and not seeing the fact that a lot of the Bible is
poetic language as well, and figurative
so
language.
they're losing it so much. It's not only sola scriptura, but it's actually solo literalism as well, which is like a double whammy of skewing the message that was there in the text itself. So that's, you can see a lot of
Philip
problems
Schaffer
with that.
says, next thing I'm going to say that Jesus is the foster son of a Jewish carpenter when he was really the son of an Armenian rug merchant. So in 1587, this Dominican priest turned Protestant Girolamo Miolo wrote the blah, 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 blah. And Miolo noted that some thinkers considered the church and doctrine of the Vaudois to be about 500 years old. Okay, so that's in 1587, so they go back to the 1000s. So now we're back to the 1000s, okay? In practice, the religious dynamic behind many of the arguments for the antiquity of Protestantism cannot be properly understood in isolation from the wider critique of the medieval church. Polemical needs prompted Huguenots and English Puritans and some Anglicans to vilify most of the history of the church as little but a resurgence of paganism. Because they had to establish their authority, they had to undermine the authority of the Catholic Church and literally undermine the early church fathers, early church history, and say that's all paganism. And those ideas are with us today. So look, Protestants were liars. Okay, let's be blunt. That's my view. I'm not saying, I don't speak for Mal, but this is what I've been very blunt. You've never had to wonder what my opinion was. I've told you flat out what I think. So the Protestant machine was the best propaganda machine the world has ever seen until the advent of Islam in modern times.
Do you know what's interesting is they're claiming that the church prior to Protestantism was pagan. That's very like the standard story that Islam paints. You have the age of ignorance. So we're the enlightened ones. Before us was just paganism, which is just another blatant lie again.
Isn't that an odd parallel? Are we noticing some parallels here?
Yeah.
And they said
it's like their script is literally coming straight from Islam. They're like, here are all the talking points here. It's amazing.
And they said the craft of ancient legislative priests had consciously aimed at corrupting religion for their own political ends. And the foremost agent of medieval corruption, the church authority then, okay? So then for those who advocated the Presbyterian church polity, now there's a flat structure, like everyone's brother Bob. The historical roots of Protestantism were much more likely to be found in the very early church at a time when the church hierarchy was undeveloped and prior to the corruptions of Rome. So notice there was that polemic.
Mm-hmm.
So now you had the Anglicans on the one side who wanted this authority structure. You had the other guys who didn't. A very broad claim. What's funny is that the Momo worshippers smooch a stone to forgive their sins. Doesn't sound pagan at all. No, not at all, Joel. Definitely. Ernesto, welcome. So let's continue, because I want to try and get through the whole document in one sitting if I can. In the 17th century, even moderate English authors thought that Roman priests... Wow, is that the time? Good grief, time flies. In the 17th century, even moderate English authors thought that Roman priests deliberately kept the people in ignorance in order to preserve authority. Even the High Churchman Richard Field, who was not advocating a Presbyterian church authority, pointed in his Of the Church that after Pope Gregory, the superstition, barbarity, corruption, ignorance, forgeries, and false miracles of the church were no longer opposed. The Pope, taking all into his own hands by innumerable slights and treading down under his feet the crowns of kings and jurisdictions of bishops, corrupted the church. In the anonymous Original of Popish Idolatries, 1624, very conveniently anonymous, the Puritan-minded author explained that for 400 years the bishops of Rome could not convert the Romans, for the bishops of Rome were too busy in restoring the Jewish and heathen ceremonies. I'd love to see evidence. For many Protestants, both Huguenots, the Anglicans, and Puritans, the imperial favor and riches granted to the church under Constantine constituted a benchmark for the spiritual decline of the church hierarchy into worldliness and spiritual corruption. So understand, lots of atheists, lots of Muslims, lots of anti-Christian people will point to Constantine as a corrupter of the church. Where did they get that idea? From the Protestants. Am I correct, Mel?
Yeah, that seems to me. Yeah. I've no thoughts on it beyond what you said.
Yeah, John Bale says here, the Pope Sylvester, although not the most wicked or corrupt, was the first pope to embark upon the anti-Christian road, and it encompassed the last years of Constantine's reign. So, yeah, okay. The gulf between Anglican and Presbyterians, the one factor they possessed in common and that at times could produce temporary religious unity, was anti-Catholicism, because they did not have unity. So what united them was hating Catholics, basically.
Yeah, it's surprising that they're hating on Pope Gregory, who actually was a great reformer. He actually is the origin of Gregorian chant, which led to great revival right across the Christian world. So that's really surprising. And that was at a time of great turmoil due to various plagues that were killing off, I think, a third of Europe at the time. So against all the odds. Yeah.
And notice here, anti-Catholicism is the sheet anchor of England's nationhood. So in the 16th and 17th century, so that was a political aim. In the 1600s, Puritan Andrew Willett had urged anti-popery as the main vocation of the Church of England. Anti-popery was thus a stock in trade of early modern English Protestantism, one that had remained central to Protestant identity into the 18th century. To be consistently critical of Rome was considered to be a mark of Protestant piety. But it was never merely a religious stance. Anti-Catholicism expressed the Englishness of Protestant identity, the reverse of the corrupt, ignorant and cruel despotism of the priest-king at Rome, rationalized against the fear of the potential superstitious darkness of a Catholic Europe. So you can see the polemic attitude here. Historical opponents of Rome were at times and to various degrees uncritically, in theological terms, assimilated into the proto-Protestant fold by the simple illustration of their opposition to Roman religious corruption. So it wasn't about their theology. As long as you hated the Pope, you were good. This was the logic of John Fox in his Acts and Monuments, in which the doctrinal deficiencies of some opponents of Rome were effectively brushed aside, by stressing the defiance of and persecution by the Church of Rome. We don't care if we don't agree on theology as long as you hate the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out at this time in England, they were constantly forming alliances with the Ottomans.
The Muslims again, yep.
Yeah, so no problem dealing with them, but not with Rome. Yeah, interesting.
Yep. Okay, so let's continue here then. Let's just go on. If a pedigree for the Waldenses could be located in the pre-Constantinian church, that fact would have been of some importance to Presbyterian-minded polemicists wanting to match the claimed spiritual lineage of Rome. Now, those claims are made by Irenaeus and Clement and others, who talk of an unbroken line of popes, right? So Rome's claim to antiquity and spiritual legitimacy was based upon the Petrine theme, Peter, the claimed presence of the Apostle Peter at Rome and his bestowal of his spiritual powers upon the bishops of Rome. This theme was powerfully argued in the Annals Ecclesiastici of the foremost historian of the Counter-Reformation, Caesar Baronius, a work that remained influential in the 18th century. Of course, the ideal parry to Rome would have been to identify apostolic origins for the Waldenses, but the evidence for such a claim was thin to non-existent, a factor often limiting arguments in favor of apostolic origins to rather vague assertions.
So evidence is clearly not on their side. So,
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Calvinist Archbishop of Armagh, James Ussher, dismissed the Catholic assertion that Waldes founded the Waldenses in favor of an origin in remote antiquity. Okay, so this guy now comes along, the Calvinist comes along and says, no, but there are. So understand, they've traced them back to the 12th century, then they trace them back to the 1500s, then they trace them back to the 10th century. Then they say, no, they're in the 1st century, but in France. Okay, and then, of course...
He's James Ussher. If I'm not mistaken, he's the same guy that claimed he knew what the age of the world was based on the Bible. I think
Yes, there's something about that, yeah. So understand, hopefully, guys, you can just start to see that this guy's writing very politely, but there is a huge amount of contradiction going on here. They can't decide. So Huguenot minister Jean-Paul Perrin asserted correctly that Waldes had founded the Waldenses. So either they were wrong or they were lying. But the fact is, this thing had been a football for like 130 years at this point. These guys couldn't make up their mind as to what was history. The Lawn referred to the Waldenses as the ancient fathers of the Protestants. Okay, so they come from heretics, They come from the apostles in the 1st century, except they were in France, or no, northern Italy, etc., etc. So this guy, diplomat, inventor, and mathematician Samuel Morland, in his History of the Evangelical Churches of the Valleys of Piedmont, okay, stated that the Church of the Waldenses dated from the apostles, but was not then a separate church. It was the same church. The Waldenses only separated from the Catholic fold after the Church of Rome began to corrupt Christendom in the 7th and 8th centuries, with the advent of papal supremacy and the idolatrous use of images. Now you've got another story. This is like, I think we're on the 6th or 7th version of the Waldenses story.
Yeah. Can I just point out something there, which just occurred to me?
Mm-hmm.
So they're claiming their pedigree through the Waldensians, but who argue for a literal interpretation of the scripture. The guy Ussher is famous for creating a chronology of the world based on the Bible, which is a literal interpretation of the Bible. That has led to the rejection of religion in general in the 19th century, because it was the stock joke of the anti-clericalists.
Right.
Basically say, if you're a Christian, you believe in a literal creationist story, and so therefore an awful lot of people left the church because of this heresy that has basically been propagated through the Calvinists. So it was a seriously mistaken move there.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, it's a complete mess, as you can see. All right. Let's continue. So some of the accounts, and unsurprisingly, avowed apostolic origins, okay, for the Waldenses caused some thinkers to renew the already old arguments that the Waldenses were one and the same with the Albigenses. Okay, now we're back to outright heresy. It was his intention to illuminate the pre-12th century history of the Waldenses, okay? But notice they've got no evidence for this. That's why they're kicking this around. He repeated the claim for very early Waldensian origin and their separation from Rome consequent to Pope Sylvester. It is hard to determine whether it was in the 1st century that these apostolical men planted the Christian religion at Milan and the diocese thereunto belonging, or whether it was done in the 2nd century. I wonder if they have any evidence for that yet today. So now we're back to the 1st century. You see now, a typical idealized account of Waldensian doctrine. Since the valleys of Piedmont were enlightened with the bright rays of the gospel, the inhabitants of these countries have conserved the purity of the Christian religion without any mixture of human traditions. They never had images, no altars in their churches. They're Muslims, you mean? They never invoked angels or saints. They never believed in purgatory, never acknowledged another mediator than Jesus Christ, nor other merit than that of his death. They never owned the doctrine of the Mass or confession, of abstinence from certain sorts of meat, of the celibacy of priests, of the doctrine of transubstantiation, but always held that the Holy Scriptures to be the perpetual rule of faith, and would never receive or believe anything but what they taught, and their doctrine was always the same as it is now. Okay. So the idealization of Waldensian doctrine had, of course, much older roots. The purity of their doctrine was proclaimed in the works of Theodore Beza, by John Fox, the Magdeburg Centuriator Matthias Flacius, and those of John Bale, all of them telling different stories. The Waldenses were not the only subjects of historical revisionism. So notice here, the author is saying these are all historical revisions, and there are multiple contradicting versions of the story. The Protestants couldn't get their story straight.
Yeah.
And notice, but Hotsivitke Ordola says, but the canon was not yet fixed then. Exactly. The canon was only fixed for Protestants around 1600 or later. So how were they doing scripture alone if there was no fixed canon? There was no fully recognized, accepted canon. There was dispute over the canon still at that time.
Yeah.
So subsequent Protestant historians argue that the diaspora of the Waldenses in turn gave rise to the Albigenses, the spiritual Franciscans, and the Lollards, all of them known as heretics. Duplessis Mornay used the term Albigenses and Waldensians interchangeably. It's like saying, Satanists and Christians, Satanists and Catholics, they go to the same church, they have the same services because Satanists are Christians, Christians are Satanists, right? This is actually what they're saying here. And they identified the spiritual Franciscans as Waldensians. He also connected Wycliffe and Lollards to the Waldensian thought. Okay.
Wow.
Perrin conflated the Albigenses and Waldenses, noting that the Albigenses had received their doctrine from the original Waldenses. So that's back in the 1600s. So your thoughts, Mel? I mean, it's just unbelievable to me that this is the confusion they've got.
Yeah,
an appeal to heresy.
I can't see how they're mixing up the two because they're very distinct sects from each other. very different sets of beliefs. But it looks like they're clutching at straws there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, sola scriptura. It's like I say, guys, I'm gonna write a manual, okay, and then once I've written the manual, I become irrelevant. Manual only. Never mind the guy who wrote it. Never mind the expert who wrote it. Never mind the panel, the professors, the PhDs, the engineers who wrote all this stuff. Manual only. Because never mind the actual experts who wrote the manual. Forget that. The guys who commissioned the manual, paid for the manual, the guys who designed the manual, the guys who edited the chapters, they're not important. We've got the manual now. Screw those guys. Throw them off a cliff. We are Sparta. Toss them down a hole. Kick them down the hole because we've got the book now. Don't need those guys. That's sola scriptura.
Yeah.
So Samson retitled part 1 of Perrin's work as the history of the Waldenses, commonly called in England the Lollards. So hold on. So the Lollards are associated with Wycliffe, and they're associating them with the Waldenses, which are now who are Albigensians, who are heretics. So Wycliffe was a heretic, and Protestants constantly appeal to Wycliffe, who is, according to this, an outright heretic. The identification of Lollardy with the Waldenses was a natural and not uncommon English corollary to the general Protestant claim to spiritual forebears. It was a common Protestant claim across Europe. Yes, we come from heretics. The Galician church could be traced back to the 2nd century. By them, the term Gallican had intended his readership to understand the supposedly ancient original Albigenses. That's Perrin. Okay, now we're back to these. Yeah, we come from Satanists. To claim for the Albigenses a greater role in the eventual Reformation. Look, these guys are flat out saying we come from Gnostic heretics. The greatest enemy the church has ever faced is Gnosticism, and we come from them. Our founders are those asswipes. Your thoughts, Mel?
I'm a little bit distracted. I'm looking into the beliefs of the Waldenses. And I'm just sorry, I'm a little bit distracted there because I was trying to.
Sure.
I see Pope Innocent III offered them a chance to return to the church, and many did, taking the name poor Catholics. Many did not, were subject to intense persecution, were confronted with organized general discrimination. But so it's a lot of this is kind of new to me, so I'm kind of trying to take it in. So apologies.
Yeah, guys, just so by the way, I gave Mal the paper some time ago. He didn't read it.
I didn't read it because I was not been feeling too well the last few days. I've got a house without any heating, so it's my
I know, Mal. I'm just pulling your leg, Mal. Don't worry. No, it's just good to not do this alone necessarily. Okay, so they claimed back in Italy, in the 1580s. They claimed apostolic origins for Protestantism and often made no distinction amongst the Albigenses, the Waldenses, and the Hussites as Protestant forebears. Okay, so the Albigenses are absolute heretics. There's no argument. The Waldenses are apparently the same, and the Hussites, Jan Hus, who is supposed to be a great Protestant forebear, he's also a Gnostic heretic, like the Albigenses. So I guess we've now confirming that the Protestantism is Gnosticism, is effectively a satanic form of Gnosticism. Giacomo Piccanino claimed that it was quite correct to describe Protestants as successors of the apostles via the Albigenses, the Waldenses, and the Hussites. And then to the Reformation, the true church had maintained the doctrine of the apostles unchanged for 1700 years, except, hold on, which one? Because there's several thousand Protestant denominations. They often disagree on fundamental doctrine. They disagree on fundamental things. Which one is the correct one? Someone please let me know which one exactly. And therefore, by definition, all the rest are wrong. Am I correct, Mel?
Yeah, there's that. The other thing that occurred to me, I'm sorry to, is the concept that the public proclamation of the church, of Jesus's message, could somehow not be important, and yet some private division within the church that's sort of invisible is actually the true church. It's just so weird, but it's Gnostic. It's Gnosticism at its heart, but it's not something that the early church would have been crazy about. They would have been immediately condemned by the first church.
And it says even the adversaries of the Waldenses confessed that the Waldenses originated in the time of the apostles, to which I'll have to say, shit. because the adversaries here with the Catholics, and I don't think the Catholics are going to go, yeah, those guys were friends with the apostles. They were the neighbor of Peter and Paul.
No, they would have been condemned as heretics because they were not basically Gnostics from, if I understand it correctly.
So it's actually gone longer than I anticipated. So I'm going to pick up the pace of fraction. So High Church were most reluctant to subscribe to a theory of Protestant origin based on the Waldenses or other medieval sects. So the High Church, like the Anglican Church, which was in style closest to the Catholics, they were like, this is a bad move. This is a bad look. It's like saying that you learned your babysitting skills from a pedophile. You know?
Yeah.
So that's like it's like no, right? So Collier exploited what might be termed the Saxon Golden Age theory. So now we have the Saxon Golden Age theory in order to locate suitable pre-Reformation forebears. But I thought Protestantism was born in the full light of history. It's always been, but somehow these guys can't come up with a story. And this is just in England. Collier did not feel that there existed sufficient evidence to assert directly the truth of the Joseph of Arimathea legend. Okay, so it's evident that Christianity got footing here in the Apostolic age, but we can't find it. Even in the 7th century, explained Collier, English Christians still had spiritual sovereignty within themselves. They were under no foreign superintendency. In other words, there was no pope that sent anyone to England. We were just doing our own thing. Nor used to apply the See of Rome to pay their homage to the Pope's primacy. Collier could therefore condemn the Waldenses, Wycliffe, and the Lollards without fear of jeopardizing Anglican foundations, because they were an independent church in England, you know. Yeah, and Wycliffe falls foul upon episcopacy itself. So the Anglican Church was like, Wycliffe's a bad man, because of course he went against the king or something like that. So, and then he excoriated the Albigenses for their condemnation of the Eucharist. Okay, so that goes against early church teaching. And of course, heresies. And then the depth of disagreement among Protestants on the evaluation of heretical sects. It is instructive to examine Anglican denunciations of sects, at times cited as forebears by other Protestants. Protestants were condemning Protestants for accepting heretics as Protestants. Now, how is it that Protestants will look at heretics and go, yeah, those are my buddies, those are my boys, they're just like us, when they're obviously heretics, and other churches are going like, hold on, those are heretics.
Wow, what a mess.
So the Anglican Abe Blackamoor described the followers of Wycliffe believed kings were accountable to the people and might be punished by the people, and that God ought to obey the devil, and that Wycliffites also allowed incest. Fascinating stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, the Albigenses were also condemned by Blackamoor because they held that the scriptures are erroneous and that there were two Christs, a good Christ and a bad Christ. Why? Because Satan is the brother of Jesus. God had two wives by whom he had sons and daughters. Oh, they were Mormons, were they now? And themselves were enemies to marriage. Oh, they were Gnostics. They were messed up.
God, this is strange stuff here.
The Hussites were a bastard brood of heretics, descended from Hus, who mixed his own ideas with those of the Waldenses and Wycliffites. Hold on, I thought this was the one true church, the one true doctrine. This sounds like a toxic soup of complete and utter BS to me.
Yeah.
How about you, Mel? I thought they found the one truth.
Yeah, no, it's a mess. They're just digging it a hole deeper. You know, the more they try to prove their case, the worse it looks. Yeah. I've nothing further to say on that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, there was no kind of uncleanness in which they did not commit in the caves and cells that made designed for that purpose. These guys were sexually depraved as well, okay? That's what he's trying to tell us. These guys were... the spectacle of Anglicans publicly defending the Waldenses as ancient Protestants became less of a rarity. Hold on, then the Anglicans changed direction and suddenly started defending the Waldenses as ancient Protestants. For whatever reason, some of them started backpedaling. But look, trust me, it's one simple straight line from the apostles, from Jesus and the 12 Calvinists, straight to Wycliffe. True story.
Yeah.
No confusing twists and turns. The Waldenses were founded not long after the apostles, and it was from them that our Wycliffe derived his faith and knowledge. So this is from the Anglican clergy, William Wake, rector of St. James, Westminster, and chaplain to the king. In his heavily anti-Catholic work, The Case of the Exiled Waldenses and French Protestants, and their relief recommended to all good Christians. All of you should follow these guys who are doing weird things in caves and think that God had two wives and all of that stuff. But that's Christian, right, Mel?
Yeah, do you know what it all of this reminds me is the Islamic sort of argument of chain of narration. And when the chain is found to be defective, they go, "Oh well, we found this other chain of narration that fits everything."
Yeah, isn't that convenient? Perfect apostolic preservation. Andrew, that is genius. Yes, we're looking at here perfect apostolic preservation.
Yeah.
Okay. One anonymous Anglican catalogued the succession of Protestant forebears back to the Lollards, the Hussites, the Waldenses, the Albigenses, and others to finally arrive at the apostles. The Baptists and Jesus. The Jesus and the 12 Baptists.
Yeah.
and then anyone who opposed the Pope was considered to be a Protestant forebear, right? And then, of course, you had Suffolk Vicar Arthur Young cited Wycliffe and the Lollards as one of the means used by divine providence to reform the church. So the Lollards were a religious movement, right, that emerged in the 14th century in England. They were considered heretics by the Catholic Church for the following reasons. One, they followed the teachings of John Wycliffe. They were Wycliffeites, right? Mm-hmm. Just like you have Calvinists and Lutherans who don't follow Calvin, don't follow Luther. They just call themselves by that name for no reason. He's an English theologian who rejected papal authority. He rejected Catholic doctrine. And he believed that the Bible should be the sole authority, not Pope, not church, not tradition. They translated the Bible into English, and of course they believed everyone should have access to scripture in their native language, blah, blah, blah. So they rejected Catholic sacraments like confession, penance, and the Eucharist, the communion, and they believed that faith alone, not deeds or rituals, led to salvation, right? So basically they had certain of these doctrines, right? They rejected prayers to saints, and so on, of course, but which is also why they had to get rid of the 7 other books from the Bible, or the 9 other books if you check Luther's canon. They had to get rid of these books because these books actually had those teachings in them. Okay? So the continued concern of some Anglicans to identify their spiritual roots in opposition to Catholicism. So in other words, they couldn't decide on their narrative, but as long as they were joined in hatred of the Catholic Church. So let me try and finish. I'll try and finish, guys. So 3 sects are said in part to have originated from the Paulicians. Okay, so Gisborne discriminated between the Albigenses, the Waldenses, and the Leonists. So these are the Vaudois, but earlier the Vaudois were kind of the Waldensians. These 3 sects are said in part to have originated from the Paulicians, a 7th century Byzantine sect, also known as heretics. And the Albigenses, according to his Catholic source, to have had nearly the same opinions as the Calvinists. Fascinating. He lamented that the Albigenses, whom he considered to have been the foremost in opposition to papal corruption, are loaded by many of their enemies with the imputation of Manichaean and other abominable tenets. Finally, we get some clarity and some truth, but then again, these guys are from the Albigenses who are Manichaean and are finally admitting it. Yes, these are Gnostics. Your thoughts, Mel?
Yeah, it's an absolute mess. That's all I can say, really. What I'm saying is they've failed to make the case of a link all the way back to the beginning. It's nothing beyond that to say.
So
really.
Some dissenters are groups that argued with the Anglican Church and left the Anglican Church. They looked positively upon what they considered to be medieval manifestations of Manichaeism. So in other words, Mani is a Gnostic. Okay, not Christian by any stretch. There is absolutely no way to rehabilitate him as Christian.
Wow, that's
so
unbelievable.
They were looking favorably. Look, there's only one thing that I can draw from this. Protestantism is based on Gnosticism. Calvinism and Lutheranism both draw upon Manichaeanism. Right? This is a mess. This is messed up. Polemicists not only republished 17th century texts, but also took the opportunity to, quote unquote, correct them. So notice they were editing history, right? We heard about that in the book 1984, where you go and change the history that's embarrassing. I believe Muslims do that too.
Yeah.
Dissenting editors identified only as several gentlemen conflated the Waldenses and the Albigenses, so this happened over and over. It wasn't an accident, not an isolated issue. In their isolated valleys, the Waldenses ensured the succession of the evangelical doctrine from the time of the apostles, which they have not been able to prove. They make the claim. Therefore, let the popish cuckoos cease for shame their old repeated but silly note, where was your church before Luther? I'm going to say, where the hell is your evidence that you go back to Jesus and the 12 Anglicans? There were many unknown opponents of Roman corruption, the editors explained, but we can show and undeniably prove the continued succession of our doctrines in entire visible churches from the primitive times to the present age. To which I say, bullshit. Mel, your thoughts?
I would second that. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Wow.
So, okay, so then we could come to this guy. So for Angel, the origin of the Reformation was to be found in Wycliffe, who maintained many of these points by which the Puritans were afterwards distinguished. In the same year, the Book of Martyrs, or the History of Paganism and Popery, was published. This anonymous work, probably that of a dissenter, consciously modeled on Fox's famous martyrology, outlined the origins and piety of the Waldenses and Albigenses as harbingers of Protestantism. So now you've got another guy saying, yeah, these Manichaean Gnostics, where were them? These are the real Christians. Jesus was a Gnostic, don't you know? In 1780, demanding the repeal of the 1778 Catholic Relief Act, Lord George Gordon led demonstrators to Parliament. The resultant No Popery riots culminated in pillaging, the theft of Catholic properties, and the rioters held the city of London until dispersed. So let me see that. That happened in the French Revolution too, by the way. And we know those were atheists that went haywire there, but okay, fine. It's a religion of peace. The final death tally exceeded 280. Yeah. Because they didn't want the British government to make, effectively, Catholicism legal and freely worshipable. Protestant historical identity would continue to be defined in anti-Catholic terms, in this case, violent anti-Catholic terms. The vilification of Catholic Church history and the assertion of a definably Protestant spiritual root through the labyrinth of medieval priestcraft. So they were insisting without evidence. I want to see the evidence. In Wesley's concise ecclesiastical history from 1781, Wesley thought it highly probable. I believe this is a guy called Wesleyanism. It could be Wesley. This what's that church that has Wesley Methodism methodology? The Methodists. Wesley thought it highly probable that by the 17th century, the Waldenses had already retired into the Piedmont Valley in order to oppose the tyranny of imperious popes, basically. So, yeah. But he did not mean to conflate the ancient Vaudois and the 12th century Waldenses. He pointed out that Archibald MacLean, the first to translate blah blah blah, relied heavily on MacLean. So in his footnote, Mosham had asserted that the Waldenses and the Vaudois, the ancient inhabitants of Piedmont, had been separate entities, although they may have had similar doctrines. Now, a previous group was there the same, and now this group's like, well, we're changing the story because 100 years ago those guys were just talking a bunch of poop, and we got to change the story. For MacLean, this position was insufficient when Papus asks us, where was our religion before Lucifer? His solution was to remind readers the Bible contains sufficient evidence for the antiquity of Protestant thought. That's an opinion. It's in the Bible, Isaiah 42, right next to Muhammad. Nevertheless, he added, to gratify Catholic taste for tradition and human authority, we may add our religion was also found in the valleys of Piedmont. So this is like 100 years later, they're talking the same old poop because people have forgotten that it was poop before. Now they're reviving the same old nonsense. Your thoughts, Mel?
Yeah, it's they've literally got no case. They're rejigging their story to suit, but it's not holding together. It's unbelievable that people went along with all of this nonsense, Yep.
Amazing. So then, of course, you got Wesley, who now conflicts with MacLean, right? So both trace back a line of proto-Protestant piety some period long before the Valdes, and according to MacLean, before the 7th century in the imputed corruption of the Roman Church. In the history of the Waldenses and the Albigenses in 1793, Thomas Taylor, an itinerant Methodist minister, explained that he had mostly relied on Perrin as his source, and the main text of his work commences with the Valdes. His introduction provided a very different account of the Waldenses from that of Perrin. Now they're contradicting each other again. That's the Protestant thing. You contradict your buddy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taylor reported that some aver their existence from the days of Sylvester, the Pope, others from the time of the Apostles. Sorry, not the 12 Apostles, the 12 Baptists. Thus, it seems pretty clear from various authorities that the ancient Waldenses carried the pure Reformation into Bohemia, long before they went by the name of the Waldenses or Albigenses. Yeah, they were called the Smurfs. Furthermore, they never were tainted with the corruption of Rome, but they've kept themselves free from the mother of harlots all along. Yeah, they were just Manichaean Gnostics, but that's okay. Your thoughts, Mel, on this nonsense? Thank you, Spiridon.
Yeah, anything but papist. They'll be quite happy to accept the label of Satanist as long as it's not papist.
Yeah.
It's amazing that they're.
So Spiridon says horse feathers, a case of bill shut. I happen to agree. Protestants, the evolution from popes to poop. Spiridon, thank you very much for that. I really am grateful. Thank you. Some have thought that the Waldenses and the Albigenses were the two witnesses spoken of in the 11th chapter of Revelations. Oh, they're in the Bible. Yes. Others have seen the Waldes as the angel that proclaimed the fall of Babylon in Revelation. Writing some 10 years or so after the publication of Wesley's concise history, evangelical Joseph Milner, who lived until 1797, did not feel able to claim apostolic origins for the Waldenses. Oh my, guess he rained on their parade there. Milner also placed great stress on the role of the Cathari in the origins of Protestantism. The Cathars were absolute, outright, flaming heretics.
Oh. I'll have to look up the Cathars just to remind you. I'll have to remind yourselves of the Cathars. Let me just see.
Okay, looked it up, yeah. Do you want to share your screen? You should be able to. Or at least you can just send me the link and I can do it as well. But.
Yeah, let me just see. Yeah, I'll have a look. I'll have a look first. So I'll come back to you.
So understand, Protestants, for the audience, Protestants trace themselves through heresy. The same division, the same disunity, the same contradiction in Protestant doctrine is found in Protestant history. It's an absolute joke. It's a complete mess. And this is a Protestant writing this, so he's writing it in a way that is really favorable. Understand?
Okay, this is what I have here. Catharism was a Christian dualist or Gnostic movement between the 12th and 14th century. So spot on, Gnosticism.
Yep.
Thrived in southern Europe, particularly northern Italy. That's the Piedmont probably part.
Northern Italy
France.
again.
Followers described as Cathars and referred to themselves as good Christians. In modern times, they're mainly remembered for a prolonged period of mutual conflict and religious persecution. Okay, so they're basically Gnostics. So how can they call themselves Christians? You're either a Gnostic or a Christian. You can't be a Gnostic Christian.
Yeah. So look, I mean, it's a complete and absolute joke. This is a joke, right? So yeah, they say they felt, so he praised and defended the 12th century German Cathari, although he felt their failure to understand the necessity of property, so they're communists as well, was a tenet inconsistent with the good order of society. The Cathari, Milner pointed out, were peculiarly numerous in the valleys of Piedmont, that's northern Italy, where we were earlier. The diaspora of the followers of Valdez only more effectively spread Waldensian doctrine, and they came to be termed, according to Milner, the Albigenses, who are the Catharis, or the Waldensians, who are the Protestants. Milner venerated Valdez as a very extraordinary personage, resembling in many aspects the immediate successors of the apostles themselves, like the early church fathers for sure. Thus, everything relating to Waldenses resembles the scenes of the primitive church. These Cathari from the 12th century are 1st century church fathers, for sure. And the blood of the martyrs again became the seed of the church. And he says here, so he connects them to the Reformation, and the Waldensians are the middle link which connects the primitive Christians and fathers with the Reformed. So they were Calvinists. Mel. The German Reinhard Lollard instructed some Englishmen in Waldensian doctrine. Milner asserted in a claim that's unfounded from the Wycliffites in England were called Lollards, and it is by no means improbable that Wycliffe himself derived his first impressions of religion from Lollard. So that's where the Lollardies come from. Okay, well, that's fine. Waldensians, and the Waldensians are the Albigensians or the Cathars or Gnostics. Is this starting to look like a little bit of an incestuous circle, Mel, and they keep coming back to the own vomit?
Yeah, I just very much see a very strong Gnostic element throughout all of this, which is really surprising, for a movement that's claims to be purely focused on the Bible. It's amazing how they have to borrow ideas from Gnosticism,
Yep. So we only got 4 more pages to go, or 3 more pages to go, then we'll be done.
Yeah.
So guys, I hope you like this material. I hope it's interesting. I was wanting to make a presentation, but then I'd have to at some point break it down into a presentation, just present the contradiction and go into Europe. But the story is no better there. But the entire story, as I've seen, of Protestant story about how they trace their way to the apostles is an absolute fiction. It is laughable fiction at best, right? And it's just a pack of lies, top to bottom. The Protestant movement as an institution, in terms of its story of Protestant succession, is nothing but lies from top to bottom.
Yeah.
In its general,
can I just share some?
Sure, please.
Just share you something, just to kind of to kind of emphasize how dangerous this heresy is. The Gnostics held a Docetist Christology in which Jesus only appeared to assume the flesh, although not assuming material form. According to the Gnostics, Jesus nonetheless was the Redeemer. But there's a problem there. If Jesus did not die in the flesh, there is no redemption. So that is like massive,
Islamic.
Yeah. It's
Gnostic
totally
Islamic.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me finish this up, guys. Last 3 slides, or last 3 pages. Let me just finish up the last few quotes. In the general history of the Christian Church, the scientists and Unitarians are heretics. Let's be blunt. They don't believe in the Trinity. They don't believe Jesus was the Son of God. They were defined as a legitimate Christian sect by the Ottomans in Hungary in the 1600s. They're obviously Muslim-style heretics. Okay. Joseph Priestley brought together the Cathari, the Albigenses, the Waldenses, and others under the catch-all Manichaeism. Oh my God, this guy identified them as Manichaeism, which he otherwise termed Gnosticism. For him, it was the Manichaean or Gnostic doctrines that sowed the seeds of the Reformation. Extraordinary as it may appear, they were the means of bringing about the Reformation of Christianity. In other words, we took this poop and we turned it into bread. Here, have a slice.
Deformation of Christianity should be called not Reformation. Wow.
The Reformation is built, according to this guy, on heresy, on Manichaean Gnostic doctrines. It is true, as Priestley undoubtedly knew, that the Albigensians or Cathari thought can be considered akin to Manichaeism with respect to its dualism. Do you understand? They're finally admitting that Protestantism is Gnostic heresy. It is bullshit from top to bottom. The dispersion of the 12th century Waldenses was the means of exciting a spirit of opposition to the corruptions of the Church of Rome in all parts. So their opinions and zeal were adopted by John Wycliffe. So Wycliffe got himself Gnostically inspired, and they wanted to destroy the Catholic Church. The teaching of Manes was based on a supposed primeval conflict between light and darkness. He taught that the object of religion was to release the particles of light that Satan had stolen from the world of light and imprisoned in man's brain and body, right? Jesus, Buddha, the prophets, and Manes himself had been sent to help in this task. For many Christians, Manichaeism in its original form was a horrible heresy, and any medieval sect associated with pristine Manichaeist thought would have been considered beyond the Christian pale and a fitting target for both Catholic and Protestant venom, except we know it's not. They said, yeah, those heretics, we're with them. As the Anglican Blackamoor put it in 1722, the ancient Manichaeans were a most pernicious brood of heretics. But he's going against all the other guys. They were fornicators and worshipped the sun besides other beings. These wickedly absurd and impious heretics held that Christ was not crucified, but the devil. Thus Christ was a deceiver. Where have we heard that before?
That is like straight out of Islam. That's actually the point I was trying to state earlier on. I couldn't bring it together. The implication for the crucifixion.
So let's just finish up here. Yeah, let me just, guys. So the next few minutes we'll be done. Oopsie, wrong slide. Click here. Okay, so yeah, so any Anglican wanting to claim that the Albigenses as Protestant forebears and avoid the possibility of furore would need to disassociate them sharply from original Manichaeism. So it is known that they were associated with Manichaeans, and then they had to change the story to get rid of that uncomfortable detail. Anglican Gisborne defended the Albigenses against the imputation that they held the abominable tenets of Manes. Of course they had to, because now they've embarrassed themselves. They've stepped in it. John Wesley might be Methodist. However, gave some praise to medieval Manichaeism, considering 11th century Manichaeism thought similar to Protestant piety. John Wesley of the Methodists was praising the heretics. Maybe he liked it a little bit.
If you praise a heretic, you can't avoid the fact if you praise a heretic, you are a heretic. That's it. There's no two ways about it.
So, guys, just so you know, Thaddeus is a Methodist, to my knowledge. Thaddeus is a Wesleyan. So, share that.
I didn't know he was a Manichaean.
But understand, so this means at some point I got to go dig into Mr. John Wesley here, because he also had inner visions of light. he also heard the secret testimony of the Spirit kind of nonsense, right? Just like Calvin and Luther, right? So I'd say there's some funny business going on there if you look, yeah?
Is he going to rebrand as Manichaean Answers?
Dude, I don't know. So now you've got here...
Funny messing, by the way.
So Wesley considered medieval European Manichaeism, at least in part, to have its origin in the Paulicians of Armenia. So now the Paulicians were Baptists or something like that. They were supposed to be Christians, but now they're Manichaeans and they're Christians. Like, what is going on here? I'm losing my mind. So Wesley, neither Wesley nor Priestley linked it, okay, you've been using the term Manichaeism, linked it to the precise heresy of Manes. So now Manichaeism wasn't linked to Manes, but to medieval dualistic sects such as the Bogomiles and the Cathari, who are outright heretics. It's like saying, it's not those Muslims, it's not the real Muslims, it's the other Muslims over there, but we like these Muslims because we attach our religion to those Muslims. We Christians, we say we belong to those Muslims, and that name is actually those bad Muslims over there. But neither was Wesley alone in tacitly overlooking or dismissing some facets of Albigensian doctrine merely as the calumny of their spiritual enemies. So the Catholics were saying bad things about them. They weren't really bad. A whole range of Protestant writers lauded the Albigenses, or the Cathari, as Protestant forebears. Some apologists did not wish to enter into an argument that might also serve to focus attention on the less than Protestant content. In other words, absolutely Gnostic, heretical, satanic content of some claimed medieval forebears, because they'd been stepping in it for 200 years, and they realized, like, oh poop, we made a mistake. Your thoughts, Mel, before I go on? We're nearly done.
Well, just to sum it all up, Century Sense has said, just a bunch of trust me bros. I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, so in the thought of Priestley, the single Unitarian of the study, is the term Manichaeist used with positive and sweeping abandon. Everyone else wants to try and say, well, it's not really the bad Manichaeans, it's the good Manichaeans. It's not the bad Satanists, It's the good Satanists are the one we associate. We Christians, we have the good Satanists in our Protestant school. We don't associate with the bad Satanists. Those are just like those Satanists, they're not really involved in the service. It's just for show for them. That's what we're hearing here. Priestley, in his opposition to Trinitarianism, regarded Albigensian dualism as the lesser evil. Hold on, so this guy is now anti-Trinitarian, which makes him not Christian. So let's be blunt.
Yeah.
Anti-Trinitarianism of both the Catholic and Protestant type was a major vote. What? Catholic anti-Trinitarianism? Okay. If you're anti-Trinitarian, you're not Catholic. Let's be blunt. Was a major motive force in the search for Protestant forebears. Priestley wrote at some length in an anti-Catholic vein in the history of the corruptions of Christianity. These guys are corruptions of Christianity. It's quite clear. Joseph Milner, in his History of the Church of Christ, condemned those who seem to think an indiscriminate aversion to the Church of Rome to be one of the principal excellencies of a Protestant historian. So he's saying, okay, so it seems like you're a good Christian as long as you hate the Catholics. Furthermore, though it is very true that the abominations of Roman Church form so shocking a narrative that our aversion to that anti-Christian heresy can hardly be raised to too high a pitch, nevertheless the integrity of history may easily have suffered in particular instances through this aversion. We might have lied a little bit in our hatred, but that's what he's saying. He noted that aversion to Rome can hardly be raised to too high a pitch. So hold on, you cannot hate the Catholic Church enough, but in our hatred of the Catholic Church, we might have told a few fibs. The crimes of the popes were as deep and atrocious as language can paint. The only image worthy of that century was the means used to oppose the progress of popery. Anything will do. The Franciscans had deep-laid plans of hypocrisy, and the austerity was effected merely in order to dupe the people into enriching the papacy and reviving its authority. For Milner, Protestant historical identity remained significantly conditioned by traditional anti-Catholicism. So the entire Protestant movement was an anti-Catholic movement. It was predicated on that. And it adopted heresy. Your thoughts, Mel, before we go on? I'm nearly done. I'm on the final page.
Carry on. I've nothing to add to that at the minute, no. So,
and he says, in which often diverse medieval opponents of supposed Roman religious corruption were construed as proto-Protestants. So as long as you hated the Catholic Church, and the heretics absolutely positively hated the Catholic Church, as far as most Protestants were then concerned, you were a good Protestant because you hate those Catholics. In 19th century England, discussions on the nature and origins of the Waldenses, the Albigenses, and others continued in the writings on church history. They couldn't figure it out, Mel. They had to keep writing in the 19th century. So for 300 years, this story has raged and they still can't figure it out. That's what you get when you lie all the time. The nature of claims for the historical legitimacy of Protestantism were very often conditioned by the conceptions of church government advocated by the writer. Those who wanted a church authority structure said, hey, these are our heretics, but those who wanted a flat structure, no, these are our heretics. It was as simple as that. Indications of an earlier tradition exist in Lutheran, whereas in the case of the United Brethren of Bohemia, Lutheran Calvinist-inspired historiography. The United Brethren, or Unitas Fratrum, were originally Hussite in inspiration and date from the mid-15th century. Okay, now they can't trace them back to the 1st century, I guess. And then, of course, the apostolic purity of the Waldenses was held in 1538 as proof of their proto-Protestantism. Now remember, they have not proven their case. What they've proven is that these guys are Manichaean heretics. It remains to be seen, however, whether this work is indicative of an older, even pre-Reformation tradition of claims for Waldensian antiquity. So, yeah, but of course he doesn't have that evidence for previous claims that, hey, these are the original Christians. So that's it from me, Mel. That's my story.
Wow. I have to say I'm genuinely shocked. I knew there was going to be an eye-opener, but I didn't realize that there was such a strong Gnostic element to all of this. To defend the Protestants for a moment, if I may,
sure.
Like historically, there were a lot of bad things that popes were doing over the centuries, you know. So they had a case for why they were angry with the Pope, you know. But at the same time, that doesn't allow them to jump completely out of the bark of Peter and join the Gnostics. Like, that doesn't make any logical sense. The idea of Reformation is you get rid of the bad and enhance the good. But what they've done is they've thrown out the baby and the bathwater, and they've embraced Gnosticism, which makes no sense. Because essentially what they're doing is by embracing Gnosticism, they're basically rejecting the core teaching of Christ, you know. So there's no way around that, you know.
Yeah, centuries since is the final line should have been, F this, I'm no longer Protestant.
Yeah.
He says, I missed the part where the Protestants took the lead at the Battle of Lepanto. They were on shore shouting, hey guys, we're right behind you, several thousand meters, but we're behind you in this.
Yeah.
You know?
Catherine has got an interesting line there. The new Pharisees and Sadducees and their bosses. Yeah, there's quite a bit in that. I do think that the arguments that existed centuries ago between the between the Sadducees and the Pharisees have come down the line.
Yeah.
You know,
but I have a question. If you have a problem with financial fraud in the church, let's assume that there was financial fraud involved with indulgences. So you say, guys, you guys are committing financial fraud. Okay? Mm-hmm. What we need to do is we need to remove 9 books from the Bible. We need to edit these books. We need to add a few words into the Bible. Then we're going to have to throw the Pope out. Then we're going to have to get rid of the sacraments. We're going to have to change the wording. We're going to have to change the doctrine. Like, I'd be like, okay, and what's your solution for the financial fraud? Do you have any, freaking financial advice here for the financial issue?
No, it doesn't deal with any of
it.
Or
are you just talking nonsense to me? It's got nothing to do with indulgences. Or are you just using that as an excuse? Because that's where I'm standing right now.
Yeah. Rick Bass has said, they threw out the baby with the bathwater and installed a shower.
Yeah, but they installed a poop shower, as far as I can tell. So yeah, so guys, that's it from me. I mean, what do you guys think of that? Does this all make sense to you? Finding exactly the same form and moving. So yeah, so guys.
Yeah, I don't know if I were a Protestant, I think I'd be having a serious problem right now. You know,
this crisis of confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, this would not fill me with great. I don't know, confidence in the history of how Protestantism began, you know. But yeah. Yeah,
so Dan Simpson says they put the baby in a blender. Sounds about right.
Wow.
Just Genesis, they've just been slapped around the face with a wet fish. And Rick Bassis, I'm questioning my whole Christian history. And Rick, I'm just getting started, but the story is a joke. Seriously, you got to read Protestant history. You got to read Zwingli. If you want to laugh yourself to death, read Zwingli. You'd be like, did a child write this? Seriously, I'm reading Zwingli and I'm like, this, my brain, it's hurting my brain. It's like, how old was this boy when he wrote this? Like 5 or 6?
Yeah. But like, where's the dedication to speaking the truth? That like should be first and foremost, you'd imagine, with these reformers. Like, surely they're driven by a passion for the truth, and yes, they're lying left, right, and center, without any regard,
Yeah, and if they're not lying, then man, these people cannot make up their story. They can't get their story straight. How do you? I mean, you just seen this guy he's writing in a very nice way, not to be nasty as a Protestant, but he's telling us these guys for 200 years have got the story wrong and still don't today have it right.
Yeah.
So, any last thoughts, Mel? I should wind down. I mean, it took us a bit longer than anticipated. Didn't think it would take 2 hours, but it has. Any last words, last thoughts?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a reformation of the Reformation to get rid of all the Gnosticism. So that's my final thoughts on it. It's bizarre. It's I can't see how anyone could argue that this is a movement that comes from God if they're encouraging an openness to Gnosticism, which is like the arch enemy of Christianity from day one.
Yep.
So,
and Rick Bass says we have been told these people are our church fathers, and they willingly lead people astray. Yeah, I mean they've lied to you for hundreds of years. Sola Scriptura, remember the biblical canon. They've said no, the biblical canon was closed at 3:02 p.m. on a Tuesday in 97 BC AD. So therefore, it's Sola Scriptura since then. And it's like, no, the Catholic canon was only settled in the 16th century and the Protestant one in the 17th century. So Sola Scriptura it's a recent doctrine. So what were people doing before that? So Century Simpsons, this has been a mind-blowing stream. Thank you. So guys, if you like this, please share it, tell people about it, read the document, check it for yourself. I just read what's on the page. But this is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. They still haven't fixed it. If they want to make an apology to me, I'll accept one in writing. I'll accept a public video, and if they have the evidence that they go back to the 1st century, I want to see it because, man, I can use a good laugh, good comedy this weekend. It would be awesome. So that's it from me, guys. I mean, and thanks all for the support. Please, I've got about nearly 30 new videos published this week. These are short 3 to 5 minute videos, so please watch those. They come with an article. Use them, learn them, annoy people with them. That's why I do them, because they annoy people. I think people that need to be annoyed with the fact. So, yeah. So thank you guys very much. Mel, sorry, last word. Then I'm done here. Then I'm gone. I'm going to get some food. What's your thoughts?
I got no last words. I think I agree with everyone. This has been a great stream. It's been a real eye-opener. So thank you, Lloyd.
You're welcome. So guys, thank you very much. I hope this gives you an insight into history and this is the historical fact. And ask the Protestants, seriously, where was your religion before Luther? Show me the apostolic succession to Jesus and the 12 Baptists, or Jesus and the 12 Calvinists, or Jesus and the 12 Mormons. I want to see that stuff, because Jesus and the 12 Anglicans, or whatever the heck it was, because cheers guys, good night and God bless. Take care.